with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, morimuli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Toronto in the wonderful country of Canada. Our guest is returning to the show. She's here to celebrate her brand new book. It's called The Stars That Shine for You. Please welcome back Rishma Govani. Hey, Rishma, how are you?
I'm well. So wonderful to be back, Jed. Thank you for having me.
Super to have you back on. We really loved speaking to you about sushi and samosas not too long ago, and I can't wait for you to tell us all about The Stars That Shine for You. This is a very different book, am I right?
Very different book. The themes of universality, what we have in common is the same. The diversity angle is really the same between sushi and samosa. Sushi and samosas was looking at food. And when we learn about other cultures through their food and cuisine, how much closer we can become as communities, as neighbors, and as countries. It's a real understanding. It's an opening to understanding other cultures. I wanted to stay in the lane of diversity and children's literature. But yeah, the subject matter is very different. It's serious. It's somber. But just because something is tough and hard to do doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So it's a different one to try to market too, because sushi and samosas you could get really excited about. And this one is just, it's important, right? I can't necessarily get excited about it. I'm excited that I have another book published and the illustrations are stunning inside and the stories, wonderful, but it's hard to necessarily get excited about it. So I'm broaching it with, it's a topic that we all need to get comfortable with. And the more we do talk about grief, this is what the book centers on, grief, loss, hope, looking at the threads that bind us together and how different cultures have afterlife celebrations or customs and traditions when dealing with death. And what unites us is we're all sad. We have death as a constant in our life. We can run, we can hide, but it's going to come and face us in some way or another. But what unites us is the stars above us. We all have special stars in the sky. And I think that's something we can all agree on, whether or not you take that in a literal way or in a spiritual way. Some cultures may not align with that, but I think in a poetic, universal way, there's commonality with all of us having special stars in the sky that look out for us.
Well, it's certainly universal that we all have stars over our heads and stars that we can see and shine down on us. And I love that idea that I'm sensing comes from the stars that shine for you, is that one of those stars is the person that you're missing.
That's right. This book, the idea of it and then the execution of it is all in honor of my late husband, who got dealt a really not the nicest deck of cards and struggled for many years with an awful diagnosis. It was a rare form of cancer. And he passed away, sadly, in 2020. And so this book is, dedicated to him It's dedicated to all the children who have lost someone close to them, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, a dog, a neighbor, an uncle, the list goes on, a family friend. And so it's in honor of him, but it's also for all the kids that need to start learning about this and need to start getting comfortable. It's a picture book for kids that are young, but I think adults can also probably greatly benefit from it. So it's a really subtle approach and entryway into talking about death. It's not so in your face, but it's talking about missing people who have gone. And there's an appendix at the end that describes the different traditions and what the images really represent in each picture and what's going on. And so you can read more about what is that specific culture doing. For example, in this page, this is called a paddle out, and this happens in Hawaii when a fellow surfer passes away. And in a way to pay tribute to the surfer, they will do a paddle out. They'll all come together, form a circle, and then they'll paddle out to honor their fellow surfer. So that's a tradition that, I hadn't heard about, and I was just fascinated by all the different things that people do around the world to honor the ones that have left, the lost ones, the ones that have died.
Right.
And so, yes, this book is in honor of my special star, who's my North Star, my guiding star, my brilliant star. He's always looking above me and taking care of me and taking care of our children. His name is Ali, and he was just the best husband, most beautiful, amazing husband and father to our two children.
I'm very sorry for your loss, and I can't imagine it. But one of the things that's I think is really beautiful is that you're at a point right now where you can look back or look up and see that your husband is shining down on you, and know that despite all the tremendous pain that you felt saying goodbye to him, that what remains inside your heart are these memories, the feelings that he gave you, the feeling to know that you were his special, precious gift in the world, and that he loved you and always loved you, and knowing that your husband will always be alive inside your heart. I think that those are incredibly important lessons that we can share with our kids.
Correct. Just because a physical life is gone, that doesn't mean the person doesn't live on in a different form, in your heart, as you just described, or above us as a brilliant star looking down on us. So there is a great deal of pain and mourning and sorrow, but I think there is also joy and there is also love. There's so many quotes that say both can exist, and the greater the love, the more the grief. And I don't think the grief will ever subside necessarily. Yes, it morphs, it evolves, it changes, but it's there. It's there. It takes different forms. But what I'm trying to do is, explain to children and adults alike that this happens. This happens. We try to avoid it, and we get really uncomfortable. It's like a taboo subject. And I think the earlier we introduce that this is part of life, young people, middle-aged people, old people, sick people, healthy people die every day of different circumstances. Children die. And tragically, devastatingly, accidents, disease, there's so many different ways. But that it is going to happen to all of us. And all of us will then evolve and take a different form. And that form could be, a shining star in the sky, but that the love lives on in our hearts.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's irrefutable. I mean, you can argue about what happens after, if there's an afterlife. Do you go to heaven? Do you become a star? I no longer have those arguments with anybody. It's like, you really believe what you want. That's fine with me. But the reality that our loved ones can live on inside our hearts, that's something that you can't argue with because it's true. And there are people that are living in my heart and will always live on in my heart. My mom, my dad, my grandmother, so many friends. And I do think it's a really important thing to start talking to our kids about. Obviously, people are going to hear this and think, well, that Star That Shines for You is a great book for me to pick up if somebody dies. And yeah, but I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is a book that is really important to read before somebody dies, before you're in the midst of that grief. If we have conversations about this with our kids and when things are going well, it's easy. We can prepare them for it so that when a grandfather, an uncle, a neighbor, a dog, when they pass, the conversation is going to be easier for you and easier for the kid.
I agree with that. And it's taken me a while to even get comfortable with it. I started out this conversation with talking about how to market a book on grief. And part of it, I'm uncomfortable. I'm still uncomfortable with parts of it. I've written a book about it. I talk openly about it. I consider myself a grief advocate, and I'm still uncomfortable. There are times, right? But the more I do it and the more we engage in these conversations, the more comfortable we're going to be. So at the beginning of this journey, when the book was published, I was reaching out to people or telling people that this is a book that really deserves a spot on a child's bookshelf or in a library's bookshelf so that they could pull it out when, not if, but when they need it. But I have now shifted that to align with what you have just described. And that is introducing it not in the time of crisis or distress or sorrow or mourning, but introducing that earlier and not making it a special book, but an everyday book. And so I've also had to shift gears in the way that I was talking about it, because you're so right. Bring it out on a sunny day, bring it out on it's part of the collection, and it rotates. And there's pictures and there's different questions that can come about, and they're already familiar with it. So when there is a death in the family, in the neighborhood, it could be a celebrity death. It could be the Queen of England. That's a book that they think of and say, I'm going to pull that out. And now maybe have more specific questions about it. But the first entry point perhaps shouldn't be when they face a death. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it's something that I've had to wrestle with. And now I'm just so much more comfortable saying, no, introduce it early. That's the whole point of this, is to get comfortable. And if we're reserving it for really protecting them and reserving it, then again, what we're doing is feeding into this discomfort. And we're trying to do is open it up and make it a conversation that's serious, but necessary to include in our everyday conversation.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think that The Stars That Shine for You it's a book about friendship. It's a book about love. But to get back, and I want to touch on that a little bit more, but to get back to what we were just talking about, this idea that we don't, and it's true. I mean, I think I went to my first wake when I was 16, when my grandfather passed away. And up until that point, it was as if no one ever died in the neighborhood or the family. But I know people died, but we just didn't talk about it. The interesting thing is that if you've and if you're out there and you're listening, you go, no, no, Rishma, Jed, you're wrong. I don't want to talk to my kids about this. I don't want to bring up death until absolutely necessary. If you've taken your kid to a Disney movie, they've dealt with death. Because I don't know any Disney movie that doesn't start with a parent being, I mean, The Lion King, the father is murdered in the first, not died, he's murdered by his brother.
Nemo's, yeah.
But we never talk about that, you know. Somebody really. So our kids are being exposed to it, especially now with all the media that they're being introduced to. I don't care what you feel about Disney. I don't want Disney teaching my kids about grief. I want to be the person that talks to my kids about grief and how to deal with it. And if I can use a Disney movie to help that, super. But it's something that's very, very important. And as a parent, we spoke with our kids about it when they were very young. I remember having a conversation with my kids about, someday I'm going to die. And if things go right, you're going to have to bury me. You know, that's the way it's supposed to be. And somebody overheard me say that, and they were like horrified. I'm like, but that conversation also went to, we love each other, and I'm going to be there for you. I can live on in you. All those messages that you're sharing with us in this. And my kids have a pretty healthy relationship with grief, and they're able to deal with it. So,
sounds like they won't be shocked by it, because at various points you've naturally had these conversations. And, you know, you brought up such a sound example. Every movie, you're right. Every interesting television series or show has someone who's missing, or the family makeup is different. Someone's divorced, or, you know, there's a parent that's gone. Think of Full House, right? The mother was gone. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the trio of men were trying to raise the kids. And the whole premise of the show is grief. You know, the mother is missing as a central character, as a central figure. You bring up, you know, Finding Nemo and Lion King. These are mainstays in pop culture. They haven't gone away. In fact, there's new iterations of it happening all the time. And they're in movies, and they're in books, and they're in Broadway, you know, musicals. And it's so funny how we just bypass the whole storyline. But there is an opening there, and maybe that's the opening. Mm-hmm. But I have faced that resistance from, you know, a friend of mine who says that's not a book. It's not a topic he wants to broach with his kid. And interestingly enough, both his parents have passed in the last few years, and the child is 6 years old, and they just don't feel the need to explain where the grandparents are, because they lived in different countries. So they didn't have an everyday relationship to begin with. And, you know, it was probably COVID that created even a further distance. So the child has sort of not been part of their lives, in a real tangible way. And, you know, it made me do a double take about, well, for my first book, I did a lot of school readings. I would go to a lot of schools and classrooms and be asked to come and do a reading in the library or in a classroom. And it was super fun and engaging. And we would have tons of conversation and interaction around what foods you've tried and what you like and what you don't like. And the kids were just so engaged. A lot of them never having a live author ever present in their school. So it made it even more exciting. And, you know, I've struggled here with, is this the type of book for a wide audience? And this particular parent was like, maybe you'll have to like have a sign-up sheet or people that opt out of this because of their discomfort. And I thought, wow. So maybe it's in smaller settings. Maybe it's classrooms that are broaching this as a topic. And it, you know, it doesn't have to be death in the scariest way. It's just loss. Mm-hmm. It's loss. There's a lot of different entryways, or entry points to talk about the book, but you bring up so many good points because not everyone is ready to have that conversation. So this book may not appeal to everyone, but there's a significant amount of parents out there, educators out there who are looking for resources, who are looking for different diversity. And even in this topic, there's a lot of diversity. And there is room for us all. There doesn't have to just be one book about children's Greek called The Invisible String. Great book. There's lots. And so it's just a genre that should be touched on, I think, throughout the year, if possible, in natural ways, by teachers and also by parents.
Yeah. And I do love that this book is showing different cultures, and included in that is different subcultures, I guess you'd say. You know, the surfing culture. It's a very, very, it's not something I can do, but that surfing culture is very strong, and the people who belong to it it's very important to them. And to see that, you know, hey, this is how they're celebrating their friend. This is how they're celebrating, and this is how they're remembering their friend's life. And seeing that this is something that's shared around the world in different ways. But again, it's that common thing that we all share, which is that we loved somebody. And we can keep that love alive. And I think that
each page salutes a different person and their relationship with that particular person. So, for example, in this page, there's maybe a granddaughter who's talking to her grandpa, and she's looking back and she's remembering him and his love of desserts. And there's a big halva cake there, and he loved ice cream, and he loved almond cookies, and he would wake up early on the weekends to be first in line for the best halva in town. So it's just, this is for the little ones, remembering their Baba Bazurg. This is for the children missing their Zia, which is aunt in Italian, and that is explained in the appendix. You know, she had soft skin and silky hair, but she was at their games, at their soccer games, cheering, right? So it's for those kids, you know. It's for the boy missing his uncle. And this uncle belly laughed at everyone's jokes, even if they weren't funny, right? And so in this particular scene, this boy has shaved his head. And in certain cultures, that's a sign of respect to honor the departed one. So, you know, in this particular scene, I've described it as a tradition that's commonly practiced in Bangladesh, in certain parts of Bangladesh, because there is some religion attached to this practice as well. Didn't want to get into religion as much.
Sure.
This is for the kids. They're waiting for the rain, and then they're going to go out and pay their respects to their beloved mwalimu, which is teacher in Swahili, right? So everybody has a different story and a different connection. This is for the friends saluting their closest childhood pal. Mi Pata was great at every sport she played, the best teammate ever. And then interspersed, there's a common phrase or a common thing about looking up to the sky to see how they shine for you. In this is an indigenous community. And this is for the community honoring their fierce elder who had a special twinkle in his eye. In one of the pages find it, this boy is thinking of his neighbor, and the neighbor always used to hand out candy to him. And what the tradition is, and this is in Denmark, they open the windows. They open the windows to let the fresh air come in, for the soul to pass, right? So the traditions are explained at the end, but it's sort of done in like a poetry form of this is a jazz funeral in New Orleans, which is a whole different approach to death, right? It's a celebration of life. And so I think what the book is trying to do is, through these very specific relationships between the child in the picture and the elder in the picture, or it could be a peer, it's not necessarily, they're showing different scenes. And then we find out, what did that scene mean? Right. You know, and what are the cultures that were represented, and what are the different practices and customs when someone dies. And I had to be careful, right? Because we talked about not everyone agreeing about what happens to, do they believe in a soul and what happens to life? And some people cremate and some people bury and some people have a lot of different perspectives. And so, I had to put a very, very clear disclaimer, right? Because this is just a snippet. This is a snippet. This is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all representation of that culture. But in certain cultures, even within that one culture that's being depicted, there are families, there are communities that celebrate or honor the ones that have passed in different ways. So it's a really unique approach, I think. There's poetry to it, and then there's some education that you can really draw on. And so that's why it's a book that kids could keep coming back to, because there's different takeaways that they could understand at different points of their journey, because it's just a pretty book to look at too. Right. So, the illustrations are really well done, not by me. And that's a little bit more about the book.
Wonderful. Well, we should know where we can go to find out more, even more about the book and find out more about you.
Yes. So the easiest way is just Google search me. My name is Rishma Govani, Rishma Govani. And the book is readily available on online stores. So you can hit up big box or smaller box chains. And the book's title is called The Stars That Shine for You. And recommend this book for every family. I think it's one to have on the bookshelf. And it's not just reserved for a special time in your life or a difficult time in your life, but make it part of your rotation.
Absolutely. We've had a really, really fascinating time speaking to the author of The Stars That Shine for You, Rishma Govani. Rishma, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading With Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.